They say a man's secret doesn't always come from what he's done, but from what he's afraid to do. In the heart of Makonda, one driver found himself holding stolen millions, and instead of spending it, he buried it. Not for safety, but because some money buys nothing but silence. They say every city hides a sin, but Makonda hides 100, and some of them drive taxis at night. That evening, the rain fell like punishment. Headlights blurred through mist, horns echoed off the wet walls. In the middle of the storm, a yellow taxi crawled through traffic. Behind the wheel was Brian Cole, 42, quiet, careful. To everyone else, just another tired driver trying to earn a living. But Brian wasn't driving for money that night. He was driving for time, because time was running out. 5 years earlier, Brian wasn't a taxi driver. He was the personal chauffeur to Minister Allen, one of Makonda's most powerful men. A man who smiled for the cameras by day and stole millions by night. Brian knew too much. He drove the man to private meetings, silent deals, and midnight airstrips. He saw envelopes that could buy silence and suitcases that could buy freedom. And then, one night, it all fell apart. The government found out about Allen's hidden accounts. The military surrounded his plane as he tried to flee. Shots were fired. Allen vanished, and so did billions in public funds. The city moved on, but one man didn't, because Brian knew the truth. He was there when Allen loaded 4 metal cases into the car. In the chaos that night, Brian took one, a case full of clean US dollars. He buried it in an old mechanic's yard outside the city. And from that night on, he vanished too. He thought he could hide from the past. He was wrong. It was raining again the night it came back to him. A tall man in a designer suit waved his taxi down. Brian stopped. The man leaned in, calm, polite, but his eyes were too sharp. "Airport," he said. Brian nodded and unlocked the door. The man got in. For the first few minutes, neither spoke. The rain did all the talking. Then the man said quietly, "You've been driving long?" "Some years," Brian answered. "Ever drive anyone important?" Brian glanced in the mirror. "Depends what you call important." The man smiled faintly. "My father once said the most important men are the ones who carry your secrets." Brian's hand froze on the wheel. He knew that line. Minister Allen used to say it all the time. The man leaned forward slightly. "My name's Tom Allen," he said. "Minister Allen's son." The words hit like thunder. Brian didn't speak. Tom continued. "They said you disappeared the same night he did. Funny coincidence." Brian forced a dry smile. "Lots of coincidences in this city." But Tom didn't smile back. His voice turned cold. "You took something that belonged to my father." Brian's pulse quickened. "You don't know what you're talking about." Tom tilted his head, eyes never leaving Brian. "Don't I?" He tapped his ear, and a tiny red light blinked. A hidden mic. "Everything you say is being recorded, Mr. Cole." Brian gripped the steering wheel tighter. "So that's what this is," he said quietly. "A setup." Tom sat back, calm. Not a setup, justice. Across town, in a small apartment, Detective Sarah Blake stared at her laptop. A live GPS feed showed a blinking dot, Brian's taxi. She had been tracking him for 3 days. Brian wasn't just a driver anymore. He was the last known link to Minister Allen's missing fortune. And someone had finally flushed him out. Back in the taxi, the city lights flashed like broken memories. Tom's voice softened. "My father destroyed lives. I just want what's left of his money to make things right." Brian said nothing. The rain hammered the windshield. Finally, Tom whispered, "Take me to it." Brian turned to him, his voice low, cracked. "You sure you want to see what your father left behind?" Tom nodded. "I need to." Brian sighed and pulled away from the curb. They drove silently, heading out of the city. While they drove, Detective Blake made a call. "Sergeant, follow the GPS. Don't engage until my signal." She grabbed her coat and headed into the storm. The taxi stopped at an old, rusted gate. The sign above it read, "Johnson's Auto Repair, closed since 2018. Brian stepped out, holding a small shovel. Tom followed, shining his phone light. They walked behind the collapsed wall to a patch of dirt. Brian began to dig. The ground was heavy, the rain cold. Minutes passed. Then, metal scraped the shovel. Tom bent down, wiped the mud away, and opened the old case. Bundles of dollars, wrapped tight, still intact. He exhaled, half laughing. 5 years, and here it is. Brian stared at it with no expression. "That money cursed everything it touched," he said. "You should have let it stay buried." Tom ignored him. He turned to speak, but then headlights flashed in the distance.
Multiple cars, engines, police. Tom smiled faintly. "You didn't really think I came alone, did you?" Brian closed his eyes. "You used me," he whispered. "You used me to find it." Tom's face hardened. "You used the country. I'm just cleaning your mess." Brian walked slowly toward the taxi. He opened the driver's door, reached under the seat, and pulled out a small black remote switch. Tom frowned. "What is that?" Brian turned, rain running down his face. "You want to know a secret, Tom?" He smiled weakly. "The night your father disappeared, he wasn't alone." Tom froze. "What do you mean?" Brian held up the remote. "I buried 2 cases that night." He pressed the button. The ground behind them erupted, not fire, but dirt and smoke. A second metal case burst open from beneath. Tom turned in shock. Brian stepped closer. "Your father knew you'd come looking one day. He left this message for you." Tom knelt by the second box, shaking. Inside wasn't money, just a single envelope, soaked but sealed. He opened it. Inside, a short note in his father's handwriting. "If you're reading this, you're just like me. And that means you'll lose everything."
Tom's breath caught. The sound of sirens grew louder. Brian whispered, "You see, secrets don't die here. They just change hands." He dropped the remote, got into his taxi, and drove off into the rain, leaving the police, Tom, and the cursed money behind. Detective Blake arrived minutes later. She found Tom kneeling in the mud, crying beside the open cases. "What happened here?" she asked. Tom didn't answer. He just handed her the letter. She read it, folded it slowly, and looked into the storm. "Then, I guess the curse is yours now," she said. By sunrise, the news would say the money had been found, that the driver escaped, that the son of the minister had confessed everything. But the truth? The truth was that somewhere on the edge of Makonda, a taxi rolled quietly through the mist, and inside it sat a man who had just buried his sins all over again. Because in this city, secrets never die. They only wait for their next driver. They said the storm ended at dawn, but for Brian Cole, the rain never stopped. It lived in his head, whispering, reminding, warning. He had driven all night. The same streets, the same ghosts, the same regrets. But this morning was different, because every radio station in Makonda was talking about him. Breaking news: police have recovered part of the missing Allen funds. The driver involved, identified as Brian Cole, is wanted for questioning. Brian turned the volume down. His hands trembled on the wheel. He had seen this before: how secrets become headlines, how truth becomes something else entirely. He parked under a bridge, staring at the rainwater below. He had spent 5 years trying to wash the past off his hands. Now it was coming back, dripping red. Across town, Detective Sarah Blake hadn't slept either. The letter found in the second box was now sealed in an evidence bag. But something about it bothered her. She read it again. If you're reading this, you're just like me, and that means you'll lose everything. It wasn't just a warning, it was a riddle. The handwriting, the spacing, it all pointed to something hidden. She typed the note into her computer, looking for patterns. Then she saw it. Numbers faintly embedded in the ink. Coordinates. A location outside the city, near the coast. She grabbed her coat and her gun. The case wasn't over. Not yet. Meanwhile, Tom Allen sat in his penthouse watching the news. The television showed police officers surrounding the mechanic yard. He held the letter tightly, whispering to himself. My father always said the money was never the real treasure. It was what came with it. He poured himself a drink, hands shaking. The coordinates, he'd seen them too. If there was another stash, it was his birthright. And this time, he wouldn't share it with anyone, not the police and not Brian Cole. He grabbed his car keys. He was going to find the driver before they did. Night returned to Makonda like a bruise. Streetlights blinked through the fog. Brian drove aimlessly, trying to stay invisible. But fate had already booked his last ride. A woman waved him down at a quiet intersection. She looked tired, drenched from the rain, coat pulled tight. Where to? Brian asked. South Dock, she replied. Brian nodded and unlocked the door. The woman got in, wiped her face, and stared out the window. For a while, they said nothing. The city murmured around them. Then she spoke softly. You've had a rough night, Mr. Cole. Brian's eyes flicked to the mirror. Her voice, calm, precise, it wasn't random. Detective Blake, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. I was hoping you'd remember. Brian sighed. You here to arrest me? She shook her head. Not yet. I just need to know the truth. As they drove, she asked questions about Minister Allen, the missing money, the letter. Brian answered carefully, each word heavy. Then she said something that made him glance back. The letter, it's not just a message, it's coordinates. Your old boss left something near the South Dock. Brian's grip on the steering wheel tightened. I know, he said quietly. That's where it ends. They reached the coast an hour later. The sea was dark, restless. Waves crashed against the wooden dock like fists. Old warehouses leaned under the weight of years. Brian stepped out first. Detective Blake followed, gun ready. You don't have to do this, Brian, she said. He didn't answer. He just walked toward the edge of the dock. There, under the planks, he began to dig with his hands. Wet sand, rotting wood, salt in the air. Then, metal. He pulled out a small, rusted box. Not money this time. Inside, photographs, tapes, and a flash drive. Evidence, Blake whispered. Of what? Brian looked at her. Everything Minister Allen did. The bribes, the killings, the deals. He made me record them all. I kept them for this day. Blake lowered her gun. You could have come forward. He shook his head. No one listens to drivers. They only listen when the car explodes. Then headlights flashed in the distance. A car roared toward them, Tom Allen's black sedan. He stepped out, soaked, furious, gun in hand. "You think you can steal my father's legacy?" he shouted. "That evidence dies tonight." Blake aimed her weapon. "Put it down, Tom." Tom laughed bitterly. "You don't understand. That evidence destroys my name, my family, my life." He turned to Brian. "You could have walked away, but you had to dig it up again." Brian stepped closer, calm, tired. "You're just like your father." Tom's eyes burned. "Maybe I am." He raised the gun. 2 shots rang out. The dock shook. When the smoke cleared, Tom was on his knees, bleeding, clutching his arm. Blake stood firm, gun still raised. Brian stared at the box, then at the waves below. He picked it up slowly. "Tell the world the truth," he said to Blake, "and tell them I'm done running." He threw the box into the sea. Then, before she could stop him, he stepped onto the edge of the dock and disappeared into the water. Blake screamed his name, but only the ocean answered. Days later, the police dragged the box out of the waves. The files survived, every document, every recording. Minister Allen's crimes filled the news for weeks. His son, Tom, was imprisoned. Detective Blake got a promotion, but she never smiled again. Sometimes, late at night, she'd drive near the docks. And when the fog rolled in, she swore she saw a yellow taxi idling by the shore, its headlights dim, its driver silent. Because in Makonda, some men vanish into the rain, and some secrets never drown. They just find another road.